strong. Even to hear Hammer share that, I had never even considered it that way. And then to also learn that this is in the language in the initiative, My Brother's Keeper, which means that there is, first of all, the issue is always going to be about communication. And one of the things that community leaders are good at is translating information into a context that their constituents can understand. So I think that what's going to make the initiative successful and get to the end goal that Hammer is describing is if we are versed as leaders in this, and then we communicate it, and so that information funnels down, so that now people are hungry. First of all, the problem is identified, because listen, I was victim of a drive-by shooting when I was 16 years old, and I didn't realize until I'm 41 now, recently, that I had trauma from it. And so there is an ignorance out there. But again, I believe that in order for something to get healed, it has to be revealed. And I think that has a lot to do with communication and the translation of language.
Well, we know that's not happening. We know legitimately that there are young men out there that that's not happening yet. So what?
I think we're seeing a turning point. I'm going to go back to Van's reminding us of what's happening even within the Republican Party. First of all, key leaders in key positions are beginning to understand and cop to the fact that what we've been doing is not working. When the crack cocaine epidemic hit in the mid-1980s and all of a sudden poor people could buy cocaine for $5 when before they could not, that led to the war on drugs, which was really a war on black and brown people. And that led to the incarceration superhighway. Now we're hearing cops, attorney generals, sheriffs saying, you know what, this is not working. We need community-engaged solutions and responses. And I think minds are beginning, even we're hearing from teachers and schools that we work with, that we fund, they want different strategies. I just give you one as an example, something that we've begun to fund that 5 years ago I never thought we would have invested in as an idea, Kevin, which is we have funded a couple of schools that have asked for transcendental meditation in the classroom. Why transcendental meditation? Because these kids are carrying so much heavy weight and heavy burden that the data now shows, the science shows that it's called quiet time. 2 moments of just quiet mindfulness and meditation per day, once at the beginning of the day, once at the end of the day, is not only reducing suspension rates and reducing violence in the schools, it's improving test scores. Now, that's something we never would have, 5 years ago, I would say, And so this is a spiritual approach where young people are understanding that even exposed to extraordinary levels of stress and disconnectedness and trauma, that the answer is within themselves. And so it's just one example of looking at business differently, Kevin, and the kinds of investments we need to make from the private sector to help work with the schools and work with our juvenile halls and work with our prison systems. I just came from Ironwood State Prison a month ago. They're working to try and turn Ironwood State Prison into a college. We need those kinds of new ideas, and the corporate sector and the private sector must invest in them.
And real quick, how important is it that parents and people in the community who, your children may have graduated, but you still go to the school. You still go and you invest in your neighborhood.
I think it's really key, and so many of us have been blessed and we have things we can get back. I just want to underscore, though, this point. A lot of the stuff that works is cheap. It don't cost a lot to have quiet time. There are technologies out there, human technologies, healing technologies, and we can take responsibility for introducing those things into our own families as well as into school. I also just want to say something. You mentioned that the Republicans are beginning to change. This is important because the Democrats have been so scared to be called the name by a Republican, they'd rather put millions of our children in prison than stand up on principle. So, okay, now you don't have that excuse. Why? Because even Republicans now are saying we're wasting money. I'm going to be involved with Newt Gingrich. I'm on a TV show with him. We don't agree on anything at all, ever, except this issue. When he looks back at the 90s, you mentioned the 1990s, the war on drugs, he says he feels that they violated conservative principles in building a big government bureaucracy with no accountability and oversight that actually gets bigger the worse it does. The more damaged people the prison system sends out, the more money it gets. So there's no alignment of financial incentives. The incentives are to do worse rather than better. He said that's a violation of conservative principle. So what does that mean? That means that we have an opportunity to move forward aggressively. Let me just say one last thing. We got to be real honest about our relationship to this next generation of young African American men, young Latino men, young Native Americans. And as black professionals, it's not good.
No, it's
not good. And I'm going to say myself, y'all are better than me. I'm going to say myself, when I first started working on Yes We Code, and I first started working with Hack the Hood, and I first started working with Kalima and those guys who were on the front lines, I had a bad attitude. I went in to the first, I'm going to be honest now, the first hackathon that they did in Oakland to have young African American men working on computers. I showed up, I looked at those boys, the first thing I thought, I hope it's not a fight. No, that's me, I'm ashamed to say it, but I'm going to tell it every time I talk about it. My first thought looking at our children was, I hope there's not a fight. We got people from Google here, it's going to be in the media. And I'm ashamed to say that was what I thought, and those boys were beautiful. Those boys were extraordinary. Those boys were upbeat. What they did. Now, we have to be honest. We have to be honest that we have gotten to the point where we're scared of our own kids, and we don't believe in what they can do. And when I saw those boys build apps, they built one set of children, young men, built an app to alert them of when their court date was. They're not wrong. They're not wrong.
Go ahead. You have a point.
I do want to pick up on this point. As a part of putting together the work for the president, we went out and did these listening sessions. And they always started with young men telling their own story. And almost always, one of the most disturbing parts of it was hearing those young men describe how they were afraid of each other. How they were ashamed of the fact that they felt like they had to toughen up when they saw another brother coming down the street. The second thing that bothered me was some of these dudes, they're in college, they're doing fantastic stuff, but the way they talk about the way they diminish themselves so they wouldn't be scary to other people. And they're not just talking about people that don't look like them. I think the most important thing that Van said is we have to be honest about this narrative that we have around our boys. It's not a white people narrative. This is an American narrative. And we have to address that narrative at home with family before we take it anywhere else. So, and then the last thing I'll say on this is parents and other caring adults. You are right. When we started this work, we looked at those stages across life. There were several things that jumped out as cross-cutting issues. A couple of them kind of nerdy, like do what works. You're going to spend the money anyway, at least spend it on something that has evidence that's going to work. Use policies. But the first cross-cutting issue is the thing we all know. The parent is first. The parent, the guardian, the grandmother, whoever it is that is accountable for that child, and what they're going to do, their first learnings, and their next choices for what schools they're going to go to. That is the most important thing. So we can't talk about doing this work for our young men and boys without talking about how we're going to provide them with the supports that they need to help make informed decisions and not, frankly, teach them the bad lessons that they learned along the way.
I want to ask you then, is part of it that we do once again need to have a sense of community where you walk out your door and you say to that young man across the street, even if you feel in your head, like we're being honest, man, you feel in your head, that kid looks menacing, but you still walk out there and you say, hey, I told you, don't stand there, come here, do this. Yesterday, don't make me call your mom, don't make me walk you home. Do we have to go back to that place? And is that something we got away from and afraid of?
Absolutely. I think the first step to Van's point is taking ownership. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not the White House problem, it's not the business sector's problem, it's our problem. And we have to take ownership, and it's going to be sacrifice. To get what we're looking for is going to really require us to let's put it this way, if there is a shortage of fathers in the community, and I'm a father, then I'm no longer a father of 3. I'm a father of 100. I'm a father of 300. So, we have to supply the demand. And
I believe in community fathers. We have a mentorship group in our church called 5,000 Fathers. So yes, we do have to take a community approach and to sacrifice, to be willing to perhaps extend ourselves a little further to really serve the community as a father. If you're a good father, good. Be a good father to 1,000 people and not just your one.